In August of 1993, I went on a camping trip with my dad and his two friends, Dave and Mark. I was 14 years old, and this was right before my freshman year in high school. We lived in Boise, Idaho, and on this trip we went way out to a place called Big Roaring River Lake. I have never been back to the location, but I remember it being very deep into the mountains. I want to say we spent more than an hour on a dirt road to get there. It was also just a weekend trip where we left on a Friday and came home Sunday. My dad's friend brought a canoe and fishing gear for me to use, but I think they mostly went up there to have a guys' weekend and to drink. When we got there, the lake was a lot smaller than I thought it was going to be, but I'm pretty sure it did have an established campground with campsites. I honestly don't remember much about the place now, but basically there were a lot of trees around and we were right on the water. There were other people camping that weekend, but not many. On our first night, we were doing marshmallows around the fire and it was just normal camping. I don't know what time it was exactly, but after the sun had been down for a while, we started seeing a lot of shooting stars. They were just happening here and there earlier in the night, but as it got later, I swear we were seeing one every minute, maybe even more than that. This really stands out in my mind because I had never seen that many in my life. None of us knew it was going to happen either, we just got lucky. I later found out that 1993 was a record-breaking year for the Perseid meteor shower, and that's why we had seen so many, but at the time we had no idea. We all stayed up really late watching them, probably until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, but somewhere in there we saw something crazy. One of the shooting stars or meteorites came streaking across the sky, and you could obviously tell it was lower and brighter than all of the normal ones. Then it actually came over us with a huge green trail and had to have made it all the way down to the ground. This was like a real impact and every one of us saw it. It looked like it hit somewhere on the hill around the other side of the lake, and the most amazing part about it was that we heard the thing rip through the air. I don't know how common it is to actually hear one of these, but it made a sound. There wasn't an explosion or a boom, so it might not have physically hit the ground, but it was so incredibly close to us and we were talking about it for a long time. A little while after that happened, the night finally wound down and everybody went to bed. The next day, we didn't really do anything other than taking the canoe out to try and catch trout, and by late afternoon, my dad and his friends were drinking beers and starting to make dinner. They were having a good old time, but I was 14 and bored, so while they were cooking, I decided to wander around the lake for a while because I didn't have anything else to do. I don't know why this popped into my head, but I started thinking about the meteor we saw come down and I wanted to go look for it over where I thought it could have hit the ground. I actually believed I might find a piece of it and had this idea in my head that it would be worth money, so I started walking in that general direction. I went about halfway around the lake, then started going up a hill on the other side and away from the water. I could always see the lake below me, so I wasn't worried about getting lost, and this was back in the days when it was normal to let your kids explore in the woods. I'm sure my dad didn't even think twice about me going over there. On my way up the hill, I wasn't on any kind of trail. I was just cutting through the trees with a walking stick I found and looking around on the ground to kill time. Then I heard something make a noise ahead of me like a decently sized animal. It was definitely loud enough to startle me and bring my head up, and as soon as I looked forward, I saw something standing in the woods about 100 feet away from me. For a split second, I thought there was a child standing on the top of a tree stump, but everything happened so fast it took a second for my brain to catch up with what I was actually seeing. When it did, I realized it was not a child and I didn't know what I was looking at. It had a human shape that was probably 4.5 feet tall, maybe 5 at the most, and it actually was on top of this big wide tree stump that was sticking up a few feet off the ground. It had no clothing or hair covering any part of its body. All I saw was dull gray skin. The other thing I noticed were the eyes. They were completely black and not like a normal person's eyes, which was probably the scariest part. I could also see definition all over its body, like visible muscles under the skin, especially on the arms and chest, but in a very lean way like a long-distance runner. I didn't have the mental capacity to understand what was in front of me, and this wave hit me that was like nothing I had ever felt before. It was actual terror because anyone would have known instantly this was not a human being. Then this thing turned toward me and we locked eyes. It felt like it lasted so long, but it was probably only a few seconds and neither one of us moved a muscle. Then it just stepped off the backside of the stump like a person would and it disappeared behind it. This scared me so much that I fully panicked and every cell in my body told me to run, and I listened. All I remember is turning around toward the lake and booking down the hill so fast that my heels were hitting my backside. I ran all the way to the water, then kept going around that whole side of the lake and to our campsite. Luckily, I used to be in good shape because I didn't stop once. When I finally got to camp, I was damn near hyperventilating and begging my dad to help me. I was yelling and trying to get the words out about what happened, and it was a whole big scene. I'm sure they thought I had been attacked by something because they were all genuinely freaked out. My dad got me to calm down, and I was finally able to tell him exactly what I had seen. His friend Mark kept asking if it was a person that I didn't get a good look at, but I must have described it well enough to scare my dad because he grabbed his pistol and left with Dave to the other side of the lake. Later on, Dave let me know my dad was on a mission to seriously hurt somebody because he thought there was a person out there that had done something to me. While they were gone, I stayed with Mark, who was an offensive lineman in college and a huge guy, but he was also very laid back, so it was nice to have him there. We were talking about it and he said something to me that I've never forgotten. In his opinion, based on my details, it sounded like I was describing an alien. That was like a light bulb being turned on because he was right. It looked exactly like an alien. I just hadn't come to that conclusion yet. Mark sat with me the whole time they were gone, which was probably about a half hour or 45 minutes. When they did make it back, my dad said they didn't see anyone or anything over there, which wasn't too surprising because they couldn't have known exactly where to look. I really wish they would have seen what I saw though. I didn't want any of them to think I was making it up. That trip was on my mind almost daily for a long time, and I thought about it so many times through high school. Mark's comments might have been the catalyst, but I became convinced I saw an alien, and I still strongly believe that today. The reason I feel so sure about it is because of the meteor we saw come down. The location where I was walking around and where I saw this thing in the woods was so close that there has to be a connection. Also, aliens and UFO sightings became way more mainstream as I got older, and hearing other people describe what they saw only solidified my own beliefs. It is exactly what I saw in the woods. I no longer care who thinks I'm telling the truth and who doesn't. It is a fact that I saw something non-human on that camping trip. I think the scariest part to me now is knowing that it saw me too. 3 years ago in October, my friend Steve took me out to ride the Wasatch Crest Trail in Utah, or what he calls the Crest. It was probably the first true big mountain ride I'd ever done, but he lives in Park City and knew the trail well. I was super excited because the fall colors were peaking, but I was also a little nervous about a section of the trail called the Spine, which is a very rocky and technical ridge that runs for maybe 500 feet with big drops on both sides. When we got to that part of the trail, I was behind Steve, mainly focused on following his line because it's not very forgiving. He was just ahead of me when I saw him come to a dead stop at a pretty precarious spot. It really wasn't somewhere you'd want to stop unless something was wrong, so I hit my brakes hard and just about ran into the back of him. I asked what was up and he just pointed off to our left and mumbled about something, but I couldn't hear him. Then he finally turned toward me and said he saw something shoot into the air from the bottom of the canyon that looked like a silver telephone pole. That is exactly what he said. Literally 10 seconds after that, it happened again and we both saw it. Something came straight up from the valley floor below the left side of the trail, and it was perfectly vertical, like it launched right out of the earth. The weirdest part was it looked exactly like what Steve had described, a big metal pole, and it went up into the sky. You could see that it was shiny and reflective, and it must have gone thousands of feet into the air until we couldn't see it anymore. It was easy to see when it was lower and had land behind it, but when it got higher, it was a lot harder to track. We didn't even have time to ask each other what was going on when we saw two more of them go up at almost the same time. One was just barely higher than the other, but they both did the exact same thing. This was right about the time I noticed that we weren't hearing anything. I think my subconscious was expecting a boom or a rocket launch sound, but all of these things had been silent. At that point, we were standing over our bikes in shock. I was trying to look down at the bottom of the ridge to figure out where they were coming from. Then 2 more took off, and these ones were a lot farther away from each other, so they had to have come from different starting points. They were probably a quarter mile apart. Both of them did the same thing and flew straight up like missiles, but that time we got a pretty good look at the closer one. I cannot come up with a better description than highly polished metal telephone poles. It's just exactly what they looked like. My best guess is that they were about 40 feet long with a 2-foot diameter, and we couldn't even fathom what they might be. Right after those 2 went up, we laid our bikes down and Steve started dumping his Camelback out into the dirt. I was standing there telling him it had to be the military, like missile or weapons testing, but that didn't make much sense since we weren't hearing anything. Then 1 more of these things went up and I watched it for as long as I possibly could, but the same thing happened where it got to a certain altitude and you just couldn't keep track of it after that. It really looked like they were going up forever. That was the last one we saw. I wasn't paying attention, but Steve had been emptying his bag to get his phone out. When he finally got it, he stood there waiting for another one so he could get a picture or a video, but everything had happened too fast. He didn't get anything and was pretty pissed off about it. The truth is though, I don't know how anyone would have been able to catch it because there was this initial minute of questioning what they even were, and when he finally thought to get his phone out, it was over. While Steve was shoving his stuff back into his backpack, we heard people yelling at us. It turned out to be the 2 guys who had been ahead of us, and they were just past the spine where it flattens out a little. We could hear them asking if we had seen it, so we hopped back on our bikes and rode down to them. Both of these guys had seen the same thing we did. They had only caught the last 3 that went up, but at least there were other witnesses and we weren't the only ones. After talking to them, we realized the most frustrating part of the whole thing. Between all of us, we had 4 perfectly working smartphones with incredible cameras on them, but since they had all been stowed away in backpacks, not one of us had gotten a picture or a video of it happening. Like I said before, there just wasn't any time to think, and the whole thing only lasted a minute from start to finish. Literally 60 seconds, and that was it. They just kept launching into the air right in a row, then it was over. Steve and I tried to cross-check our memory to figure out how many there were, and it was 7 in total. The first one only he saw, then we both saw the second one. After that, there were the 2 separate pairs that went up, and finally the one at the end. 7 of these things had launched in roughly 1 minute. We ended up talking to those guys for a while, and none of us had a clue what they could have been or where they were coming from down in the canyon. No one had ever seen anything like it. I always tell people to picture telephone poles made out of solid polished metal, then imagine those being shot vertically into the sky at the speed of a rocket. It was truly one of the most impossible sights you can imagine. There is one thing I've thought about as far as where they could have been coming from, but it could be totally wrong. I wonder if somehow they were taking off from this little lake that sits at the bottom of the canyon on that side. I did look down there while it was happening, but I didn't see any disturbance or ripples on the surface. It could be a possibility though. I don't have any explanation, but I know at least 4 people saw this happen. I still get extremely disappointed that no one caught it on camera, and that's really changed me. I now have a rule where I always keep my phone in the outside pocket of my backpack. It's not as protected if I take a fall, but I like knowing I can instantly reach back and grab it if I ever need to again. Years ago, I was coming home from a church event with my mom and dad, my brother, and my grandpa. We were all in my mom's van and she was driving. The year was 1989 and this took place in Garden City, Kansas. I don't remember anything about the drive itself except for one moment. We were going around a corner and my grandpa, who was up in the passenger seat, started yelling at my mom to pull over and to stop the car, and it startled everyone else in the van. She panicked and pulled over onto this gravel area on the side of the road next to a bunch of mailboxes, then shut the engine and the headlights off, making everything go dark. My grandpa had already jumped out and my mom got out right after him, and they both walked out in front of the van. My dad, my brother, and I had no idea what was happening because no one said anything, so we were the last ones to get out. But as soon as we stepped onto the gravel, we realized what it was. There was an extremely low aircraft shaped like a perfect triangle over the road just ahead of where we were parked. It was really close to us and had to be only a few hundred feet off the ground. It wasn't flying or going in any direction, it was just stopped in the air. There was a single circular light on all three of the corners, and each of the lights themselves were rotating. The most vivid memory I have of this moment wasn't even the aircraft though, it was the way my grandpa was acting. He was absolutely losing his mind and all over the place, walking out into the road and shouting at all of us, and this went on for several minutes. During that time, the aircraft didn't move an inch, but the circular lights on it did. When we had first gotten out of the van, they were turning in a clockwise direction. Then they slowed down and came to a stop. After that, they started to rotate again, but in an opposite counterclockwise direction. I remember this clearly because my dad was almost narrating the details behind me while he had his hands on my shoulders. Right after the lights changed direction, the entire aircraft started moving west away from town, and I can still hear my mom saying, "Oh my God, it's moving." It wasn't following the road we were on exactly, but it was heading in roughly that same direction, and I'll never forget what happened after that. My grandpa aggressively grabbed the keys out of my mom's hand, then he got in the van and drove off alone. He basically stole our car and left the four of us standing on the side of the road at night and dressed in our church clothes. My mom ran out into the middle of the street and was yelling at him as he drove away. It was a pretty chaotic scene. We had no other choice but to stand there and watch this aircraft move away from us all the way across this huge field until we couldn't see it anymore. Then my whole family was just stuck there in the dark, wondering if my grandpa was even going to come back. It felt like we waited a long time and only one car went by while we were out there. My dad actually walked into the road and waved the guy down, but I don't know anything more than that. I only know that he stopped and they were talking for a minute. Then the guy drove away, so maybe my dad had asked him to call someone for a ride. Either way, we wouldn't have really needed the help because not long after that car drove away, we saw the van coming back. My grandpa pulled into the gravel, and before he could even stop, my mom was yelling at him for leaving us there. Then my dad walked over and the three of them were arguing and talking over each other. My brother and I heard bits and pieces of their conversation, but I mostly remember my grandpa saying he chased it for 5 miles. When the commotion was all over, we finally got back into the van and my mom drove us home. My brother and I went straight to our rooms to get ready for bed, but the three of them stayed up talking about what had happened. I know my mom called the police because I heard her describing what we had seen over the phone, and I even remember hearing her telling my dad that the police had already gotten other calls about it. No officer ever showed up at our house or anything though, and that was kind of the end of it. I never heard anything about this incident outside of our family. I only have one other memory from that night, and it was hearing my grandpa telling my parents that the aircraft wasn't from here. He was a veteran with years of service in the Army, and he kept saying it was not military and it was not one of ours. That really scared me. You would think that with an experience like this, the object itself would be front and center in my mind, but it's not. What I remember most was my grandpa's reaction to it. I was still a kid then, and seeing him act like that really upset me, and it got to my brother too. Sadly, my grandpa passed away after a very short battle with cancer when I was 13, and that was only a few years after this happened. I never got a chance to talk to him about it as an adult, which is so unfortunate because I know he would tell me everything if he were still around. My brother and I have never had a problem talking about what we saw. My parents, on the other hand, decided long ago to keep this story locked away. They have never wanted to talk about it, and I don't know why. It got even worse after my grandpa died too, and basically became a forbidden topic. If I ever brought it up, they would shoot me down, and it was almost always because of my mom. I've never understood why, and the way she acts about it is like I'm insulting my grandpa or something. I don't think my dad feels as strongly about it, but he still takes her side and refuses to discuss it. I just can't imagine what caused them to ignore it like they do. At least my brother and I are still on the same page, and I'm so thankful for that. He would love to figure out what we saw just as much as I would. I want to thank everyone for watching another episode of Skywatcher Stories. If you like hearing these personal experiences of strange sightings and alien encounters, please subscribe because I upload new episodes every week and it really helps the channel. Until next time, keep watching the skies